So I've been rereading the original Naruto, and I realised something. I really, really like the pre-time skip Naruto way better than I do the post-time skip. And I've been trying to explain to myself why I feel that way. The first thing that came to mind was the fights. In Shippuden, the fights get bigger, they get flashier, but they don't feel quite the same, or they don't have the same intensity. In pre-time skip Naruto, you have fights like Zabuza versus Team 7. In that fight, you have a lot more teamwork going on, you have a lot more just interaction between the characters, whereas in Shippuden, it's more about just big explosions going off all over the place, or fighting against impossible odds without there being this sort of cohesive unit working to overcome their enemy. The closest I think you can get is when Sakura and Shiho teamed up together to fight against Sasori, but that's about it, because all the other fights are sort of one-on-ones, except for in the case of right at the end of the series when they team up to fight against Jubito, but that's not really the same. They're not working in tandem, they're working separately to do the same thing. But more than that, the themes in the first part of Naruto just seem a whole lot darker, a whole lot more serious than the themes that you deal with afterwards. Because in part 1 you deal with whatever his name is. Gato, that's it, Gato. We deal with Gato screwing up everything, and how his corruption influences the people, and how when you take away hope from people, they sort of just crumble and morale completely disappears, leaving them in a state where they can't really do anything. They don't have the will to fight back anymore. And then you also have themes of blatant extremist racism going on in the hidden Mist Village, which don't really get touched on, or to the same extent as they do when you're mentioning Haku in part 1, who had his mother killed, and he killed his father, who went after him because he had a special bloodline trait. These are just some of the themes that appear in the first part of Naruto and seem way darker than any themes that pop up really in the second half, I'd say. You've also got themes like trauma and PTSD with Tsunade, when she deals with the idea that she could bring back her brother and her lover at the cost of at the cost of healing someone that she knows is a threat, a possible grave danger to the world and her home. But she has to deal with that. She has to deal with the thought that she knows if she helps him, she can see the two people she cares about most, but at the cost of doing something that they would be completely against. So it's a moral dilemma that doesn't really get brought up, I feel, too much in part 2. Whereas in part 2 everything seems a lot more simple. There isn't all these morality questions that the characters have to go through. There isn't Naruto being a sort of guiding light to act as a moral beacon for characters so that they can see a brighter future in him, because they don't fall into that despair in part 2. The exception would be Itachi and Sasuke's relationship, with the whole reveal that the Uchiha massacre went on because of the structure of the village itself. But I'd argue that's a relationship that was set up in part 1, and it just happens that the payoff is in part 2. You've also got feelings of you also have the idea of what it means to be without purpose. Gaara, like at the beginning of the series, what does it do to people? How do people react when they don't have a purpose? Take Haku, for example. Without Zabuza, he had no purpose. And without purpose, he was just going to leave himself to die. But Zabuza gave him a purpose to live again. And you have Naruto asking him if that's the right thing to do, if it's right to live someone else, even if you know that they're not the best person in the world. I'm rambling at this point. Anyway, moving on from the themes, just Naruto's talk no jutsu. We all know that's a major thing in the entire Naruto series. He can convince people to change their ways, but I feel in part 1 it's not as bad, because in part 2 you have him convincing Obito, who spent, I'd say, at least half his life, maybe more, trying to complete this Moon's Eye plan, and at the end of the series he's able to turn him around to work with him. He's also convincing other people to help him, that really I don't feel like they would have turned around completely like that. Like Pain, for instance. Convincing Pain that his entire ideology is wrong and that he needs to change his ways, and he needs to believe in what Jiraiya believed in, although believing in that is what got him into trouble in the first place. So I feel like his talk no jutsu becomes a bit too prevalent in part 2. And then in part 1 you have him dealing with Zabuza would probably be the first one to come to mind, but I don't think that's as extreme, because Zabuza still felt those things, and it wasn't his entire morality being changed. It was more Zabuza having his feelings brought to the forefront by Naruto's words, rather than him pushing them all down like he's always been doing. And then you've got the talk no jutsu with Neji, but that didn't really take effect until after the fight, when Neji was confronted by Uncle and he read his father's letter. So from there he changed, and it wasn't just solely on Naruto's words or actions that did it. And then Tsunade, her relationship with Naruto was a lot more complicated than just talk no jutsu. He was sort of a living embodiment of what her brother and her lover would have wanted. He carried the same dream, so the relationship with him was a lot more intimate. And even then, it's not his words that changed her mind. It's more his actions and his determination. And to begin with, Tsunade didn't have the same sort of moral issues as, I'd argue, Pain or Obito did, and she wasn't really a villain or someone who was completely morally opposed to Naruto. She was experienced, and she'd gone through a life that had resulted in pain, and it had caused her to become jaded. But she was far from being, she wasn't even going to originally help Orochimaru, and even when she went to see him, she wasn't going to help him. So I'd argue that talk no jutsu on Tsunade is a lot more believable than any of the talk no jutsu that happens in part 2. Although it is arguably the biggest display of talk no jutsu in part 1. And then you have him trying to talk no jutsu Sasuke, and we all know how that ended up. It ended up with Naruto getting stabbed and Sasuke leaving. So, yeah. But that's just my thoughts on the matter. And you'll feel free to leave your own comments down below. Yell about what you think. Yell if you think I'm an idiot and I'm just a rambling fool. But don't forget, embrace your weebdom. See ya.